all of us as women at some point. We enter into the burnout cycle because we're not taught about our bodies. And essentially, we're not given the user's manual for this complex, beautiful body that we've been gifted as women. And I say that because there's so many amazing benefits of being a woman when we can understand our bodies and actually lean in to these amazing gifts that we have.
This is the Conscious Economics Podcast, and I'm your host, Rhiannon Rosalind. This is the place where we explore people, planet, profit, and art through the lens of the new economy. If you're interested in changing yourself, getting more creative, or changing the system at large, then this is the podcast for you. Tune in every other week as we explore these topics with amazing guests. We'll go deep, we'll go heart-centered and soul-felt as we go into how we change ourselves and change the world. What's up, everybody? This is Rhiannon here. Welcome back to the Conscious Economics Podcast. And we are rolling now into season 3. Thank you all so much for those of you that tuned into our first episode. Really, really amazing conversation there. And we've got another one for you today. And I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. So just to give you a little bit of the background, because this is another pre-recorded conversation from when we had this special guest in Toronto with us. So her name is Kayla Osterhoff. Now, I'm going to tell you about her in just a second, but first I want to tell you the story of how I ended up finding Kayla. So I was laying in bed with my husband and we were just having, a relaxing Sunday, and I was doing what I do to decompress, which is watch Gaia TV. So for any of you who don't know what that is, it's basically like a Netflix for consciousness freaks like myself. And so I was watching a particular program that I really like to tune into on that Netflix for, consciousness. And I saw this interview with Kayla and I was blown away. Like I literally kept pausing it and like poking at my husband, and sort of like by the end I was almost like jumping up and down on the bed because everything that she was saying just resonated so deeply in my being. She was really commenting on how us women are primed for leadership, but that we've been really functioning and living against our unique biorhythm. And her science and, expertise that she was delivering on this particular program, it just made me stop and think, we need to get her to come and speak to our community. Many of you know we've had an ongoing project called Heartwork, which is our national program all around advancing women. You can check it out on our website. So we had her come in for that. And then, of course, we had to have her stop in at Lunar Club. So this particular episode that you're about to listen to was our conversation at Lunar Club just a couple of weeks ago. So relevant. So to give you the backstory, Kayla Osterhoff is a neuropsychophysiologist. I know that's a large word, but it means that she is a women's health science expert. And she has such an amazing story of how she came to this work, but she's formally trained across the health sciences with a Bachelor of Science in Health and Ecology, a Master of Science in Public Health, and currently pursuing her doctoral degree in the field of neuropsychophysiology. So essentially, she worked for a number of major organizations in the US, including as a health scientist for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and spent several years prior to that working in a clinical setting. And then she decided to go off on her own and create her organization where she is really helping women understand their bodies, getting really, really, curious about how we can reform our economies, our society, and the way that we approach life and work to be in alignment with the way that our unique bodies and hormones are really divinely engineered. And so this conversation, I know, is going to blow your mind, obviously for our audience that are, women, but also for anybody else, all identities, the men that are listening. This is such an important part of building the conscious economy, listening to Kayla's philosophy and how she approaches this work. So without any further ado, I really hope you enjoy this incredible episode. So yesterday we did this really special and incredible event, and we had a very important special guest fly in from Atlanta to be a part of yesterday's event. Everybody, let's give a warm lunar welcome to Kayla. We need a walk-up music. We didn't have it, so imagine that it's really going. I'm so honored for you to be here with us. It's so exciting. Let's get super comfy.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me and for that amazing tee up. I hope I can live up to the expectation.
You're living up to it. Okay. We've already heard you yesterday, so we're not getting into that whole scene. You, though, I mean, it's kind of funny because, and I know that this is very frustrating because a lot of people look really young and then they have this unbelievable, background. And you, before you were even doing this work on your own and really specializing into women's health, you've been doing a lot of work in major health institutions. So how did you get drawn into becoming a scientist? Like, is this something from a little girl or?
Yeah, what's funny? My mom used to tell me, like from the time I can remember, maybe around 3, I think are my first memories, that she would always tell me I'm going to be a brain surgeon. And somewhere that resonated and stuck because I'm obviously not a brain surgeon, but the brain
kind of,
is
are.
In a different way without the knives and all the blood. Yeah. But I love the human psyche and the human brain and understanding behavior, and my drive to specifically study women and really understand what makes women tick comes from the horrible experiences that the women in my family have had. The women in my family pretty much all suffer from mental illness and have been completely let down by medical professionals and society at large. And so everything from suicide to addiction to crippling depression, these are the experiences of the women in my family. And when I watched this as a little girl, I had fears that this would end up being me. And that, because I have a genetic predisposition, so many people would tell me that, I will end up in the same way as the women of my family. And so that's what really drove me to get into the health sciences. And there was an experience that completely shaped my life, and that was in my junior year of undergrad. My mom had her first overdose from opioids and almost died, and it completely sideswiped my whole family. We had no idea that she was an addict because she was very highly functioning, as most women are. We're very good at masking and just pushing through and pretending like everything's okay when it's not, especially when we have families to manage. And so at that point, it was just a life-changing moment where I realized that our health systems are completely broken because her addiction was 100% fueled by her doctors. Her addiction was prescribed. Nothing outside of her prescriptions were taken. So that's actually what drove me into the field of public health. And when I went in to get my master's in public health from that point, my goal was to work on the opioid epidemic at CDC. And so when I graduated with my master's, I applied.
Which is huge in Canada, especially in Vancouver.
Oh my gosh.
We are in absolute, it's, and you're
Huge
saying it all,
problem.
so I don't need to repeat, but just, yes. Okay.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, and it disproportionately affects women, and we'll get into the reasons why that's the case.
Yes, we will. Yeah.
It's a coping mechanism, and certainly was for the women in my family and for my mom. But when I finished up with my master's, I ended up working at CDC. I didn't work on the opioid epidemic because if you can get a job at CDC, you take whatever they throw at you.
Sure. It's huge to get
very
that
competitive.
opportunity. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
So I ended up working in global health, and I worked on all of the emergency responses while I was there. So I worked on the Zika response, remember, a few years back, and both of the Ebola responses, and then I retired from the corporate world and went off on my own. But that whole experience really shaped the way that I view the medical system and the way that I view science and the way that I view women. And my biggest passion is women, and being in rooms like this with so many magical women where we can have an intimate discussion about our magic and bring in the science, it's my favorite thing to do. So thank you for inviting me to be here.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing that part of your story. I hadn't heard that part of your story. I'm obviously glad I asked the question. Thank you so much. And obviously, I have to cry just a little, just because
cry with you.
It's
okay.
so true, though, and it's so true. And yeah, my mom is still struggling with addiction, and it's a coping tool. It's not like because somebody's bad or it's because we have not had the resources. And I myself was using it as a coping tool in being a mom of two, running a national organization, 100 events a year. I was using alcohol, and I've been alcohol-free for 5 years, and it's changed my life so much. But I feel you, and you are on such a mission with this work. So let's open it up and let's explain, I think to start, let's explain why science has failed us women. Let's start there.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, women experience mental health issues disproportionately in comparison to men. And the reason why is because our society is set up in such a way that it is not in support of us and the way that we function in the world. And the reason why is because there's a gap in the information needed to build appropriate infrastructures and environments for women. And this really dates back to the beginning of time, and it's a scientific problem. And scientists like myself have to take responsibility for this because we are going to be an essential part of the solution. And that is that women have not been included in the scientific research since the beginning of time, and even modern day in 2022, when we have so much technology, women are still not included in the scientific research, and it's a mind-blowing problem that it even exists. But there's two main reasons why this is the fact. The first reason is an ethical issue. Women can become pregnant at any time during their active cycling years, and so for that reason, they make very risky research subjects. And so instead of creating more structure around researching women and even pregnant women, we just say, well, let's just eliminate them altogether because it's easier. And the second reason is way more frustrating than that. The second reason is that women are biologically extremely complex in comparison to our male counterparts. So what I mean by that is we are physiologically shifting in our operation from day to day through different hormonal phases, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But what this creates is this very complex research subject, and it's extremely hard to control for those changes, for the ebb and flow in our biology. So again, instead of controlling for those things and figuring out ways to include women and consider their unique physiological aspects, we just eliminate them. So if you want fast, cheap data, which is what everybody wants, you study men. So even the lab animals that are used in our scientific research are male lab animals because of the same complexity that comes along with the female lab animals. Studying women takes extremely more resources, more skill, and a lot more time. So it's a problem that a few of us are working on to get women included in the research at the appropriate levels. We're starting to see a shift. Unfortunately, there's been some policy that have set us back in the world, and that was
that specifically in the U.S. or where?
Well, in the U.S. was where this happened, and unfortunately, whatever the U.S. does, the world kind of follows suit. So women have always been excluded for those two reasons, but this was a formal policy put into place by the FDA in 1977, and they basically banned all women of childbearing potential from all clinical research. And they didn't overturn that ban until 1993, which is crazy in and of itself. That's when the Office of Women's Health was created at NIH in the United States. So the United States, as far as I know, is the only one that had strict policy around banning women. But again, the world follows suit. Yeah. So even though the ban was overturned and the requirement is supposed to be that women are included in the research, but it all comes down to money and who's funding the research. The people who are funding the research that need the data, they want it done quickly and cheaply. And you cannot achieve that by studying women. You just can't. So women are still left out of the research, and the Office of Women's Health actually, every 5 years, they put out a report on the progress that is made on this very problem. And every year, you can look up these reports, they say, well, little to no progress has been made, and here are our recommendations moving forward. Fast forward 5 years, little to no progress has been made. These are still our recommendations, and it goes on like that, and it's still happening. And it's not just a US problem. The US has put it into policy, but this is a problem around the globe. So it's something that we have to be aware of.
It's unbelievable to hear and for you to articulate it in the way that you do. It's scary. Like, it really is alarming because we're half the population, 51% of the population, and we have been really misguided and misled, and we're continuing to be in many ways. So was this part of you deciding that you wanted to leave? You were just like, I can't, I got to get somewhere where I can actually tackle this?
Yeah.
Is that what it was? Or
what happened to me is what happens to all of us as women at some point. We enter into the burnout cycle because we're not taught about our bodies. And essentially, we're not given the user's manual for this complex, beautiful body that we've been gifted as women. And I say that because there's so many amazing benefits of being a woman when we can understand our bodies and actually lean in to these amazing gifts that we have. So what happened for me is when I was just kind of starting at CDC, I was also starting my doctoral degree in neuropsychophysiology. And at the same time, I was competing as a professional athlete on Team USA. And so I was, as you can imagine, like...
Pardon me? Can you back up just a minute? What?
Yeah, I was just
oh my
very,
God,
very
I have
busy.
to lay down.
I know. Well, and I'd never laid down, and that was a big part of the problem. So, of course, you know, it looked like on the outside that I was very healthy and
I got
had it
really
all
excited.
together.
I didn't hear what was the sport. What was?
Oh, in duathlon. So running and biking.
Oh my God. Okay. I did a couple marathons not training at all, just forced myself to do it.
Oh my gosh.
Slit my tits open. I wore an actual wire bra running a marathon. Like, I was not a runner. I was like, I'm going to do this. Fuck that. And I put it on with the sports bra over top. I'm like, yeah, that'll be better because I have big boobs, so it hurts. So I did that. Ran this thing, at the time was a smoker, smoked like cigarettes after across the thing. Such a scene, but pushed it way too far.
Oh, yeah.
Never laid down.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
that's really something.
Yeah. Women have a very special gift of going past our limits and burning ourselves down to the ground.
Yeah.
And I did that to myself.
And feeling like we've accomplished something by that. And we're a hero and deserve an award.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
A good friend of mine, we were joking when we had a little girls' weekend to just relax. And we're joking about how we love to collect these badges of like, look at this hard thing I did. Look at this other hard thing I did.
Yeah.
And look, like I've got this whole sash of badges of hard things.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm so
But the
done.
problem is finally you realize no one actually fucking cares.
Yeah.
And now you broke your shit down and you're fucked.
Yeah.
And you can't do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really bad. And I've done the same thing, so I absolutely get it. And man, oh man. But I didn't realize that that's what was going on. And I, of course, didn't realize what you're about to teach us right now.
Yeah.
So when you go about explaining this, you explain all the science, but in the context of we're actually designed to be leaders, is your thesis.
Yeah.
And So tell us why that is, because we don't see that reflected in society, and we see that we just can't keep up, that we're burning out, that there's too much going on. Like the amount of overwhelm that is just, and I don't care whether you have children at home like I do or you don't, it's across the board, we're feeling it as women. And it just is getting increasingly almost worse is what it feels.
Well, and part of it is actually one of our superpowers for leadership that also drives us to do so much for so many people. And so this is like a psychological programming or propensity to think for the collective that actually is a epigenetic predisposition that all women have. It's not even a thing that we can shut off. It's part of our subconscious mind that it's there and it's in every single woman. And that's because women have taken on a caretaker role in society since the beginning of time. Women have been responsible for the children and the elders and the community and the household. And so passed down through generations and generations and generations of caretakers.
It's epigenetically imprinted.
It's imprinted that we think for the collective. And so because of this, this really drives our behavior to burn ourselves out to benefit those around us or to even prove ourselves to get the love that we want from our community and from our family members. So there's a lot kind of driving this behavior that is actually a superpower for leadership, because thinking for the collective is something that we want every leader to be able to do. And
there's not always a lot of that going on.
No.
I just gotta say, and I'm not talking poorly about anybody here, but I obviously spent the last 14 years of my career running the Economic Club of Canada, the largest business platform in the country, and sitting at the tables with C-suite and economists and politicians, which happen to predominantly still be men at this point, and listening over and over and over again the conversations, not the public conversations, not the PowerPoint, not the slides, not what's on TV, but actually listening. And because I was a young woman, I was often overlooked, thought that I was the hotel staff or that I was somebody's assistant or I was somebody's aide. So people talked, it actually was a superpower because I was so I don't know what the word is, valued or whatever it was, that I witnessed a lot. And I was very taken aback. And I don't mean this across the board, and I'm not singling any one person out, but we're in a crisis of consciousness in not thinking about each other in the collective, and the mindset of the sort of, and this isn't a bash on capitalism, because there's so much more to all of these things, and I believe in business and that we can be abundant and be well and still be doing good things. But there is something really missing, and I think it's women being in positions of power.
And unfortunately, even when we see women in positions of power, they are trying to lead in a masculine way, which 100%. Is completely against their biology and the way that they operate naturally.
100%. And it's funny because, and I want to get you to explain the different phases in a moment and we'll go through it, but it's funny you say that because when I felt most successful in my career, I was running so much masculine energy through my body to the point that I couldn't have sex. Like I could not come down off of what I was running on because I was in, pressure cooker situations. I had to assert myself in such a way. I had to walk into boardrooms where people were like, oh my God. And then I had to bam, come out and close $100,000 deals with executives across the country who were like, who the frick is this? It was just, it was the Wild West. And when I finally got pregnant with Luke, my first son, and I took over as CEO of the company 2 weeks before giving birth to him. So, and it was a real scandal. It was a glass cliff scenario. I was told that I was going to step in to run the organization while the senior leadership was running for public office in the federal election. And so I stepped in. I was like, but I'm really pregnant. Are you sure this is going to be fine? They were like, yeah, it's totally fine. He won't win. And so I was going through it, doing it all, running it, blah, blah, blah. so pregnant. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks before I gave birth on the 23rd of May, and it was May 2nd, he was elected. And they told me he wasn't going to be elected. They assured me, which is strange, I know, but, and this happened. I know. I was 26 years old, okay? I didn't know what the fuck was going on. I had no clue. It stunk, clearly. There was something up, but I didn't realize. And so there I was, and all of a sudden, it was a blind pass off because it literally, so a whole entire enterprise on my lap with a big mess attached to it, a really, really big mess. And because of the trauma I came from and all of the things I came from, it was like a huge problem. And I was like, of course I have to take this on. Of course I have to fucking solve this. Because it was in my DNA, because I come from trauma and a household of addiction and dealing with people's shit and issues. So this was just like what I deserved in my, and I don't mean that like actually. So I went through, but in the pregnancy, this is such a feminine time to be in connection with your body. And I couldn't get it figured out. I couldn't birth. I had to have an emergency C-section. I could not birth. And I tried for 36 hours with midwives at home, and I couldn't birth. And they were like, you have to fucking calm down. Because I was like, Even at the nail salon, I was like, they were like, can you, ma'am, relax your hand? I can't perform on this. But this is what happens to us. And this was me. I was very successful, okay? Like, I was getting awards.
You had that badge. You did that hard
I
thing.
had the fucking badge, and I want to burn that shit because it did nothing for me except lead me to a terrible spiral. Yeah. Okay, so what was happening to me? What could I have done different?
So what was happening to you is happening to all of us on some level at some point in our lives, whether it was in the past or it's currently happening to us now, or we're about to enter into total burnout. And it's just that we have no understanding of our bodies. We have no understanding of how to properly support ourselves. And the societal expectations that are placed upon us are unrealistic. For women, they are realistic for men because society is built around the male biology. And the reason why that's the case makes total sense, because what do we have the data on? Male bodies, male biology. We have studied men extensively. We understand exactly how they work and function and operate. And the unfortunate part is that we've made the assumption that women are the same, and that the biological parts that men and women share, so everything else other than what's covered underneath a bikini, that the rest works in the exact same way as our male counterparts. And that is the biggest mistake we have made as a society. It is the reason why women are burning out, because our bodies are not consistent like our male counterparts. They are completely inconsistent in terms of this micro view. And so I'll just explain that a little bit, but please. The male biology runs on a 24-hour repeating clock, and it is set to the pace of the adrenal hormones. So this is cortisol and melatonin, our sleep-wake hormones, right? So women obviously have this too, but that is not what drives our global physiology. So with men, everything from the brain to the cardiovascular system to the respiratory system to the reproductive system to the immune system to the nervous system, all of that, right? All of those parts run based on the adrenals and this 24-hour repeating clock. So what that means is that the male biology and physiology and the way that a man operates and functions in the world is very consistent day to day, which is pretty nice as a researcher, because that's an amazing research subject. They are the same day in and day out. And so it's nice to be able to rely on that consistency. And in society, it's really nice to be able to rely on that consistency as well with our male leaders.
So our whole design of our labor force, working 9 to 5, which again, I know also goes back to these old traditional, like it was the Ford assembly line and this idea of like structuring. It was a male workforce. We're on this circadian clock. It's 24 hours. This is when people are at their peak performance to work the assembly line, and then they have their, breakout, and this is the way that it all is.
Yep.
And so here it all is, and now fast forward, and we're all in it.
Yeah.
And we're doing it too. We're trying.
We're trying.
We are pushing.
Yeah.
We are doing it.
We're doing
we're
it, but at the expense
of ourselves.
Yeah.
At the expense of ourselves. So please tell us about our inconsistency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it still is consistent, but it's a longer consistency, right?
Yeah.
So we still have
consistency.
We still have a cycle. It's just not a 24-hour cycle when we're talking about the global physiology. So all of those things that I mentioned, the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, the musculoskeletal system, immune system, all of this stuff in the female physiology operates on a 28-day cycle that is driven by the ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And so as these two hormones ebb and flow through 4 different hormonal phases across the month, it completely changes the way that women function and operate in the world. It completely changes our biological and physiological functions. And so because of this, I always say that women are actually 4 different women over the course of a month, because that's how dramatic the changes are.
Amen. Yeah. And that is so true.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the first phase.
Yes.
And describe to us what happens and what our special powers are in that first phase.
Yeah. So I just want to mention that women are just like fascinating for obvious reasons, right? And when you get to study women, they're even more fascinating. But these 4 different versions of us have their own unique physiological characteristics, but also their own unique cognitive, what I call superpowers or benefits. And this is the part of what makes women such amazing leaders. We're kind of like born for this, but then we also have these special cognitive superpowers that are enhanced at different times across the month that we can actually leverage and lean into for our success. When we learn about this, we can start to align ourselves and operate in this cyclic way and benefit from the cyclic nature of our being. So I want to start out with a kind of historical perspective, and I think it'll be really interesting considering this is the Lunar Club, and it's actually really cool that we are closer right now to the new moon, because in ancient tribal times, before there were endocrine disruptors and infrastructures and schedules that took women out of sync with their bodies, all the women in a tribal community that were together would cycle together. And usually they would also sync up with the moon phases. And so in the new moon, all of the women of the tribe would be menstruating at the same time. And this is the first significant hormonal phase of this 28-day cycle. Now, what the tribes knew intuitively, they didn't have what we scientifically know now, but they intuitively knew that this was a really special time in the women's cycle and a really potent time for the entire community. And so what they would do is have all the women within the community who were cycling together gather together to make decisions for the collective of the community for the next 28-day period. Now, what they knew intuitively is that women have heightened intuition, or what the scientific community now calls cognitive empathy, which, by the way, is a real thing. A woman's intuition is a real thing. It's something that we are actually measuring in neuroscience now. Using brain imaging technology, we can actually understand the mechanisms of this. But back then, the tribes knew that women were more intuitive during this specific time of their cycle. And so how brilliant of them to actually see this as a technology that they could use for the benefit of their communities.
Human
so
technology.
They would send the women to a gathering place, which now is referred to as the Red Tent, which you might have heard of or read that book. But when they would send the women to gather together, they would make the decisions for the tribe, meaning that they would decide how resources were going to be allocated for the next 28 days. They would decide, who should be in leadership and how the community should operate to be successful, right? And so what's going on here now, we are starting to actually understand it, and it's what we forgot about for so long is starting to finally be understood from a scientific perspective, and that's the work that I do. And so in phase 1, what's happening is those 2 key hormones that I mentioned, estrogen and progesterone, are at their very lowest level. And when that happens, there is, like I said, this global physiological shift. And essentially what's happening is there's this downshift of our bodies. And so when we look at like our bioenergetic systems, we see that the conversion of food into fuel, or the conversions of macros, fats, carbs, and proteins through the citric acid cycle and ending in ATP, which is the fuel for the cells, for the body, that whole process slows down. And in addition to that,
so we're just not getting the same energy to our cells during that time.
Exactly.
Which is why we would feel
we have less energy.
We have less energy.
Yeah. So we have less energy, and this is a physiological function. It's not something that we can even control. So I like to think about all of this in terms of resources. So essentially, women's resources are lower during this time, so it takes a smarter application of these resources in order to maintain our energy levels and other things. So also, our mood is typically more subdued and lower during this phase, and that's a natural thing that is supposed to happen. But what society tells us is that's not okay. You're depressed, go on medication, or get with the program and wake up and push yourself through.
Yeah.
So typically what we do, instead of...
And don't talk about it ever.
Yeah. So instead of conserving these resources and smartly allocating them for our success, we burn through them, and then we go into adrenal burnout, which ends up turning into hormonal burnout. And now our key hormones that drive the entire physiology are totally screwed up.
Well, and also, if you think about the fact that we are more intuitive at that time, then naturally our body's drawing us inward with the lower energy, so we can be able to receive that intuitive
100%.
message.
It's so brilliant how the female biology is designed. And now we're waking up to this, and we as women, once we understand this, we can start to tap into the magic of being a woman. And so you're exactly right. What the body's doing is saying, hey, we have this special gift that's going on right now. So I'm literally going to give you less energy, and I'm going to give you a lower mood so that you don't focus outward.
So you don't want to, so that you can.
So that you can focus inward
Yeah.
and tap into this intuitive insight.
Yes. Okay. The Conscious Economics Podcast is brought to you by CPP Investments, manager of the Canada Pension Plan Fund. Canadians can be confident in the fund's sustainability. CPP Investments has earned more than $300 billion in the last 10 years and has more than $500 billion invested around the world. The Canada Pension Plan is set to provide a retirement income foundation for generations to come. To learn more, visit cppinvestments.com. That is amazing. What's the next phase? We're going to go through the phases, and then I have like so many questions about things.
Yes.
Oh my God. Okay.
So every phase is my favorite phase.
Okay. Well, that's amazing.
And I always say that I love getting women to love their periods and also love the phase that usually gets the bad rap of because it has PMS, right?
Yeah.
But that one probably really is my favorite one.
That's the follicular?
That's the luteal.
Oh, the luteal. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Luteal.
Yes.
I'm luteal up in here.
I love it.
Okay. So what is it? What's the next one?
Phase 2 is the follicular phase.
Okay, follicular.
Yes.
That's what I do to my husband.
Yeah. And these phases, I actually have different nicknames for them because I don't like these medical terms. And these terms assume that we're just talking about the menstrual cycle, which we're not. The menstrual cycle is the heartbeat of the global physiology, which I call the biorhythm. So the biorhythm phases to me are different terms. And phase 1, I call the shed phase instead of menstruation, because we're shedding our uterine lining for those of us who still have a cycle, and for those of us who don't, and also for those of us who do, we're also shedding what no longer serves us because we have that heightened intuition and we can streamline and make better decisions, right? So I call phase 1 shed. Phase 2 I call the plant phase because this is when we are kind of like planting the seeds of our success for the rest of the month. So in phase 2, this is marked by a steady rise to a peak in estrogen specifically. So estrogen becomes like the star of the show in phase 2 and phase 3. And so as estrogen rises to a peak, so does our conversions of those macros into ATP, so the fuel for the body.
More energy, more efficient, more resources.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We also get a higher level of fat oxidation, so fat metabolism, and carbohydrate metabolism.
Do we actually, is this a better time to, start a health routine or something?
Yeah. I mean, well... No, I think there's a better phase. I think there's a better phase.
I need some fat oxidation.
So what essentially happens is our metabolism is completely ramping up.
Okay.
And so we're getting a lot more fuel in all different ways. So glucogenesis, glycolysis, and lipid oxidation, all of these things are ramping up. And so our body is just drawing more fuel out of the food that we're giving it. Women also have more endurance during this time. So this is actually when we can push through.
Okay.
This is when we can work long hours.
Yeah.
And maybe even get away with sleeping a little less, which I hate to even say that because we don't sleep enough in general.
Sometimes you just have to.
Sometimes you have to.
Yeah.
So, think about that.
So this is after the shedding,
After the
menstrual
shedding.
phase. This is when shit's gearing up.
Yep.
You can do a little more.
Yep.
You can push a little harder.
Yep.
You could have that schedule be a little bit more packed in.
Yes.
Okay.
And the nervous system has more of a parasympathetic quality to it, meaning that our stress tolerance or our stress threshold, the amount of stress we can handle is higher during this phase.
Have the difficult conversation with the person that you've been putting it off with during this phase.
100%. Yes. So as estrogen rises to a peak, also we get a nice boost in our excitatory and mood neurotransmitters. So epinephrine, norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, glutamate, all of these things, we're getting more and more. So we have a greater ability to focus. We have more mental endurance. And a really cool thing that happens during this phase is that as estrogen rises to a peak, our emotional intelligence also rises to a peak, which is super cool, meaning that we can relate to others in a more profound way. So this is really kind of a really great phase for leadership as well. All of them are, but this one, if you're leading teams.
If we were, leading teams, then this would be the time. So we would have used the previous phase to go inward, to intuit what is really needed here. What are we going to have to figure out? I can tell Susie's a little off. I'm going to talk to her next week, though. Like that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, we're coming in now. It's amping up, ATP, something, epinephrine. And we are calling those meetings, having those things.
Action.
We can work a little longer. We can do all the things. Okay, what's the next phase? This is my favorite phase. It's small, but it's my favorite because I feel really special during this phase that you're going to talk about.
This phase is like the unicorn glitter phase.
Unicorn glitter, that's why I like it.
I call this phase the bloom phase because this is when women are in bloom. This is when we are feeling our most energetic. This is when we have our highest mood, the greatest mental focus and endurance, physical and mental endurance, our highest amount of emotional intelligence. This is when we have our highest amount of fuel for the body. And so we just have this greater capacity to do it all. But the coolest thing,
Which is the ovulatory phase in scientific terms.
Yes, so that is the ovulatory phase. And as you mentioned,
for sure.
it's really short because it's more of a phase shift than a phase in and of itself, because it kind of marks the midway point, and it's the peak of estrogen, but it's also the peak of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which should get like this little bump right in the middle of the cycle.
Yeah.
So with all these hormones going on, we have all of these amazing neurotransmitters at the highest level that we've had of all month long. We have the most amount of fuel for our bodies, for our mental endurance, for our physical endurance. So we can kind of do it all. And we're highly influential at this time because we are outwardly focused. We're very charismatic. And so charisma or charismatic influence is the cognitive superpower of this time. So if you think about that as a woman in a leadership role in the corporate world, or running a business or running a family, however you are leading in your lives, and no doubt you are in some capacity, this is when you have the most influence. So doing your pitches, doing your strategic partnerships, your reaching out, your social networking. This is when we want to be interacting with other people. And we also want to be using those resources, right? So again, we have the most resources out of the entire month during this time, and we don't want to waste them in a way. And so we want to actually use up those resources, because if we don't use up those resources, we're not going to be able to sleep. So we need to be able to use up those resources.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. I mean, not that I'm not using the resources every day, because I am. That would be a different problem, not for me.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting. So this is We're in Bloom, all the things. I think for the artists also in the room, this is a great time to book like a really great show, the release of your album, like these kinds of things, because you're so magnetic at that time. And all of the beautiful, everyone's just really interested in you.
Yeah.
They can get pregnant during this time too, though.
You can also get pregnant, so be careful if that's not what you
want to do. Yeah.
If that is what you want, then go for it. Yeah.
But if you don't, then watch out, because it's really everyone's all coming in and it's really going hot and everything's wonderful. And I think you're hotter during this time too.
100%.
You're so much hotter. Yeah. Because you're happier, you're feeling it. It's just, it really is.
Is anybody in this phase right now?
No, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, it's not unfortunate, because all the phases are amazing.
True.
I'm actually in the next phase, which would kind of align with the waning moon,
I'm in
right?
that phase too, so let's talk about that now.
So this is what I call the grow phase, and you'll understand that in a moment. But this is the luteal phase. It is the...
I like that one.
It's
for some reason.
Yeah.
I like the name of that, because it makes me want to just go luteal, if that makes any sense. It's just lunacy. I don't know. I like that.
Yeah. Well, honestly,
Might not be that,
just quick, tiny detour, really quick. So the most studied research topic in terms of women, can anybody guess what it is? Where we have the most data and the most resources have gone into? PMS has to do with it, yeah. What? Like childbirth? No, that's not it either. So
I wish it was.
Yeah, there is a good amount of research around birthing and children, so that's good. But no, the most, where most of the resources scientifically have gone in studying women is, why are women so hysterical? Yeah. So hysteria in relation to our periods, like mood swings in relation to our periods. That's where most of the research has gone.
And we hate when someone says, "Oh, are you getting your period?" Don't you hate that? Ugh.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's get back on track with that luteal phase.
Yes.
Because we'll start to digress.
Yeah. So in this phase, what's happening is estrogen is taking a back seat. It's stepping off stage, and progesterone is coming onto the stage and becoming the star of the show. And as progesterone becomes the star of the show, some really cool things happen to our brains, specifically as women. So this is also what I call the brainy phase, and that's why it's my favorite. I know I said all of them are my favorite, but this is like my
your phase.
extra favorite.
As the scientist, of course.
Because a woman's capacity to learn and grow and adapt is heightened in this phase because of the cool neurological things that happen. So one of it is that brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, is a neurochemical that is enhanced as progesterone rises to a peak. So when we get this nice little peak in BDNF, what happens is we get enhanced neuroplasticity, meaning our brain is more moldable, more adaptable. We can learn at a higher rate, but we also get more neurogenesis, which is mind-blowing, super cool, because first of all, in the scientific community, we thought that adults had a finite number of brain cells, and those, once they died, right, that you can't get it back.
Dead and gone, they told us. Dead and gone.
They told us that, and they lied.
But it's not true?
They lied. And for women, it's even cooler.
Why are they lying all the time?
Well, they didn't know. They just didn't know.
All right, fine.
So what we now know, which was only like 10 years ago, we realized that neurogenesis is possible in adult humans. Now, the coolest part is that during the luteal phase, women have higher levels of neurogenesis. So not only is our brain more moldable and adaptable, our neural pathways can be changed easier during this phase, but we are literally growing new neurons at a faster rate during this phase. So our brain is growing.
That's unbelievable. So in a leadership time, then we could be learning new things about our industry, taking in new information, going to conferences, or reprogramming important things that we want to work on. So like setting a new behavior goal, or doing deep subconscious work. You know, I do a lot of reprogramming work through meditation and different exercises where I'm trying to train myself to not do brutal things on a loop that aren't enjoyable. So this is a good time for those.
Great time.
And is this the good time then to start the new health kick?
Yes.
It is?
Yes.
Okay.
This is when I would start any kind of new behavioral change or routine that you want to start.
Okay.
Because we have this heightened plasticity. We're more adaptable during this time. But there's a caveat to it, because our stress threshold is decreasing. We have more of a sympathetic quality to our nervous system. So our nerves are a little more on edge. We're more fight or flight during this phase.
Okay.
So we have to become aware of that. So if the new behavior is going to cause you a lot of stress, then definitely don't. We want to do things like that if we can't eliminate them during the follicular or ovulatory phase.
Good time.
But this time, we want to leverage this ability to learn and grow and adapt. So if you have to take continuing education credits, or if you're a researcher like me, this is a really potent time to be able to learn and grow, and you can get away with doing a lot more in a lot less time.
Okay.
So you can be more effective, more efficient.
So looking at contracts, deciphering things. I'm again thinking of the artists in the room, like these things that we may not feel so inspired to do all the time. It's like these are the great times to be able to do that. Okay.
Yes.
Well, that's really exciting.
Yes.
And this is so fascinating. And thank you so much for sharing this. So we're going to send something out to you all that's going to have all of these different phases, because I know it's a lot of information to take in. And I think I know there's a lot of great apps that you can start tracking your cycle to see when you're in those phases, and then be able to align, as you don't have to do it all, but just start to be even mindful and watch yourself and like see for yourself how your energy levels are feeling during these times. And if you are an entrepreneur, if you do have a bit of control around your schedule a little bit, maybe do try to do like the pitch meeting during the ovulatory phase and see how that looks, or, you know, more social engagements during that time. Like just simple little things to start trying it out, I think is so exciting. Now, I have a couple of questions. First, I want to talk about the younger women in our lives that aren't yet in their menstruation phase. Are they having these same experiences, or how can we start to open them up to this so they're ready for when this is happening? And then my other question, which you'll do, is those that have stopped menstruating, what is going on then? And I know we said the moon cycle, so I know we can always still follow the cycle of the moon, even if our bodies aren't doing that pattern as a way to still follow these cycles. But I just would really love to know those.
100%. And please, if you can do anything for this cause, it is to take this information and share it with as many of the women in your lives as you can, no matter what life phase they're in, especially our girls, our young girls. You know, this is the information that we should be equipped with from a very young age. So what's happening with our younger girls is they are not yet cycling, and their biology is more like the male biology up until they start menstruating, because they're more consistent. There isn't really this cyclic nature. Now, I say that with a grain of salt because we're not studying young women pre-menstruation. And so I don't have the science and the facts to back this up. But this is the assumption that we are currently working under. So what I would say is preparing these women to, first of all, get excited about their menstruation that will be coming up. Instead of making them scared about it, we should get them super stoked, because you're about to experience all these amazing things. You're going to be 4 different women across the month. You're going to have all these cool superpowers that you can tap into, and you have all these different capacities that your body can handle. So we really want to prepare our young women by getting them excited about this life change that they'll be going through. And then our postmenopausal women, this is really cool. Is that what we're finding now? And of course, we have a whole bunch of anecdotal evidence. So the accounts and stories and case studies of women who are postmenopausal. And from that information, we know that women who are postmenopausal still experience a month-long biological and physiological rhythm, meaning that, you know, the reproductive system is no longer operating in this monthly menstrual cycle, but the rest of the body is. And so what my theory is on this, which is all I have at this point until we start actually researching and gathering the data, is that what's going on here is our bodies are groomed to operate in this cyclic way, and all of those systems that I mentioned, those global physiological systems, are trained to operate in this month-long rhythm. And so when that pacemaker kind of starts to wane, and when the ovarian hormones kind of pass on the baton to the adrenals, which is essentially what happens, the rest of the female body and female physiology remembers how to operate in the cyclic way, and it's really the only way it knows how to operate, and so it continues on. And so for my postmenopausal ladies who don't have an active period to track, or for my ladies who don't have an active period because they may be on hormonal birth control, or they may have some metabolic dysfunction, or they may be stressed the heck out and not have a period anymore, you still have these 4 phases, these 4 versions of yourself. So you can use the moon phases to align with and track. So the way to start with that would be to start with either the full moon or the new moon, and figure out if that time point is either phase 1 or phase 3 for you, because women can be kind of either cycle. Most women are going to be where the new moon is menstruation or phase 1. And then the other portion of women will be where the full moon is phase 1. So you could be either or. And also,
how do you figure that out if you're not menstruating? How do you figure out?
So either if you already kind of knew what your cycle aligned with when you were menstruating, it's most likely that it's still going to be that same. If you are not sure, then tap into, or kind of lean into what's going on in your body. Is your mood heightened, or is it kind of at its lowest point? Because those are 2 stark...
So maybe journal and track for a few months, see, like, track your mood, and then you'll be able to know.
And I actually, I have a journal tool that I use with the women that I teach about this, that I would be happy to provide everybody here for free. And it,
oh my gosh, thank you.
It's a tool that you can use to track your energy levels and your mood and a few other like physiological metrics that can teach you where you are. So even if you use a tracking app, which the problem with those is that they require you to have a period in order to use them, because you have to put in, you know, the first and last day of your period. That obviously doesn't work for a large portion of women. So tracking is a better way because it also increases your awareness, your personal awareness of your body.
Yes.
And we have to lean into our bodies and unlearn the detachment that we have learned through society. We need to reattach to our bodies and reattach to our natural rhythms, which so beautifully align with the natural rhythms of nature and the earth.
Nature and the earth. And this is now you're preaching conscious economics. And it's exactly what we believe in here. And it's so new economy because this is the way we have to go if we're going to be able to, I have to wrap it up. You are doing such incredible work. So we're going to link to Kayla's website where you can find out more about what she's doing. She's left it to do this. She's doing it. She's changing the world. We obviously are going to be doing tons of things and having you back because I'm just so blown away by just everything and so grateful to you. So thank you so much. We're just blown away. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. So I know that just blew your mind because it definitely, everyone in the audience, I mean, even just listening back myself, I am so blown away by this information. I feel so empowered to know that this information exists and, that we now have access to understanding how to follow these unique cycles that we all experience as women. This is powerful. And so for those of you that are interested in finding more out about Kayla's work, her vision, we will link her website, which has some incredible courses that she offers. She does do a lot of speaking and other media events as well. And we'll also link you to her social media. So thank you so much for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you again here at the Conscious Economics Podcast. Bye for now.